Hey guys, welcome back to Babo Bassin. It's finally here. Our Cougar Marine USA Cavitation Plate finally arrived. It comes with everything you see here. You got the top plate, the bottom plate, and then it's also going to come with the silicone and the necessary stainless steel hardware to install it, so you don't have to purchase anything else. You get all of that for $309.79. And that was with shipping, so $309.79 shipped to my house. The first step the instructions tell us to do is to mask off our lower unit underneath the cavitation plate. This is to keep it from getting scratched up when we're sliding that fiberglass on and off, doing our test fitting procedures that we're going to need to do. After the initial taping, I came back and I actually taped up a little bit higher on the front of the lower unit just because of the curve of the new cavitation plate. Now comes time for the first of many test fittings that we're going to be doing on this project. You're going to take that bigger lower cavitation plate and you're going to slide it up onto your lower unit. And it comes notched, but you're going to have to make that notch specific to your particular motor. And to do that, we're going to have to be doing several test fittings. A quick look from underneath, you can see what I'm talking about. We're going to take the notch that they put in there and we're going to make it specific to our lower unit. The goal here is to get the front of your lower unit to fit snugly in the front of that cavitation plate. And to do that, we're just going to mark where it's catching and widen out that area by cutting it out. We need to mask up the top of that plate in order to protect that gel coat from chipping and splintering. Now we just transfer the marks that we made when it was on the lower unit up to the top side of this plate so we can grind it. Next is grinding away where we marked in order to widen that plate so we can slide it onto our lower unit. Now a test fit to see where we stand after that grinding. I've only been taking a little bit off each time just because I can't really put more back on if I take off too much. So I'm pretty conservative, cutting it and test fitting it. I'm going to do that multiple times. We will mark it and then it's on to grinding again. I'm going to start grinding it from the top and bottom side of the plate just to ensure I don't start beveling the cavitation plate and not getting a true fit when I test fit it. Next up, you guessed it, another test fitting. We're going to slide that cavitation plate back up there. We're going to take a look and see where it's catching. It's getting closer, but like I said, I'm purposely doing it a little bit at a time just to make sure I don't take off too much. And do make sure you're double checking both sides of that cavitation plate so you don't start grinding off more on one side than the other, because you want it to sit straight on your lower unit. Okay, and after using the grinding wheel, we're going to come through with that Dremel with the sanding drum and just kind of smooth out and even up all the rough cuts from the grinder. So you'll go back and do this however many times it takes. And then it's finally time for your final test fit. Jumping back to the underside, if we take a look here, you can see the front of that lower unit is going to be right up in the front of that cutout for the lower unit on that cavitation plate. And so once all that's done, all your trimming and test fitting for this part is finally completed. Congratulations, we're finally moving on to a new piece. We're going to tape off the front of that top plate because we're going to be marking and trimming that next. This tape will again help protect the finish and keep it from chipping and flaking, and also make it easier to mark because sometimes it's hard to see pencil marks on the gel coat. So when I first set that top plate in place, I noticed the top plate wasn't sitting as tight and flush as it should against the lower unit. And I think it's because of the curve in the motor's cavitation plate. And so we're going to have to fix that first. And here's a little bit better view of my mark that we're going to grind down. Right here we have that little lip, and we're just going to round it off to match it up with the lower unit. I figured I should take this opportunity to mention you shouldn't do like I do, and you should probably be wearing a long sleeve shirt, gloves, and a respirator anytime you're cutting or sanding fiberglass for health's sake. Here you can see the lip that we ground down, so this top plate can sit flat on the lower plate and flush and tight up against the existing cavitation plate of the motor. Now we can get back to what we were supposed to be doing. We're going to test fit that top plate and cut the front of it with a curve to match the lower plate. Now you'll want to take your time because you want to make sure that both plates are sitting on your motor straight and that there's even spacing on both sides. So getting this one adjusted before you can finally clamp it and mark off where you need to cut can take a little bit. Now I marked off on the inside of that top plate about even with the start of the lower unit. The outside mark was just kind of an estimation on my part. I wanted to kind of give it a curve similar to the lower plate, so that kind of just gave me like a similar radius on both ends. That was just kind of by eyeballing, honestly. And so I found a 5-gallon bucket lid, and it kind of had the same radius, and so I used that in order to ensure both sides had the same radius, just in case my eyeballing on where the drop-off point should be was a little off. So that was just kind of to ensure I got the same curve on both sides. If we're all happy with the marks, then it's time to cut. Again, I'll use the grinder to do all the heavy lifting and take out the majority of the material, and then I'll come back and finish up and smooth everything out with that sanding drum on the Dremel. So now we're supposed to even up each side and make sure it's even on both sides. Clamp it down. How are we looking? Very technical.
Did you want me to get some measuring tape?
Oh, wait, that works. Perfect. There's a right way and a wrong way to do things, Boo.
So we're redneck engineering now?
Yes, yes. Exactly. You say that like it's a bad thing.
Let me check.
Did a little trimming off camera just because I figured it would be pretty boring for y'all to watch me do the cutting and trimming that I need to do. And I really don't want this to be a 20-minute video. Or an hour long, or however long it's going to be. I was going to try not to have it be that long. So, I went ahead and did some trimming off camera and confirmed the measurements and everything that it required me to do in the instructions. Make sure that it's even on both sides and everything. And so now, I'm just going to mark where this plate goes. And so, everything looked good from the top side. I hadn't actually checked from down here. Yeah, 2.5 and 2.5. Awesome. The instructions basically say if the serial number on the upper plate is forward of the rear of the lower plate, then all you need to do is cut off the back of that upper plate flush with the back of the lower plate, which thankfully we can do that. Otherwise they want you to round it off. Okay, so now it's time to rinse and repeat. I'm going to cut off the main chunk of the excess from that top plate with that grinding wheel, and then come back with the sanding drum on the Dremel tool and just clean up all the rough edges and get it looking good since it's going to be on the top and pretty visible. When we're finally happy with everything, it's time to clamp it all together so we can start drilling out the holes. I erred on the side of caution and put a bunch of clamps on it because I didn't want it moving halfway through. The instructions tell you to do the 4 corners first, and so you do one corner, insert the bolt, pin it, then do the next one, insert the next bolt, pin it, and do that for all 4 corners. Now once you get done with the 4 corners, it doesn't really say that you have to do each one individually, and so I started to do that, and then I quickly changed to just doing 2 at a time because I figured that all those other bolts should keep it all in place pretty well. Once you get to this point, sit back and admire your work because you're finally done with all the cutting and grinding and everything you have to do. Now we just got to glue it together. I forgot to mention, when I did one final test fit, I started looking at the trim tab, and I was worried that I might have to remove the trim tab in order to remove the lower unit like I did on my old motor, and then I had to pull my cavitation plate off. So I decided to go ahead and just cut out a little notch around where that trim tab goes. Now time for the acetone. A little acetone and paper towel, we'll use that to get all the oil and grease off of all the surfaces that we're going to be putting the silicone on. So we're going to use it on the top plate, the bottom plate, and the cavitation plate of the motor, since they're all going to get that marine silicone on them. Don't forget to remove your masking tape as well. Okay, so now we come through and we put a thick bead of silicone on the top of that main plate. We're going to go around all of the holes collectively, and then I'm also going to come through and go around each hole individually. Also, while we get the silicone out, we're going to place a thick bead of silicone on the top of the metal cavitation plate of the motor itself. That one's going to go on the outside edge, the very outside edge of that plate. Now is the time for the moment of truth. We are going to slide on that lower plate very carefully underneath the metal cavitation plate. I used a clamp to help keep it in place, and then I also spun the prop around to kind of just help hold everything in place. And then we're going to take the top plate and position it and lay it down on top so we can sandwich the motor's metal cavitation plate between the two fiberglass pieces. Now it's time to install the bolts. We're just going to do them hand tight at first and go in a crisscross pattern to help keep the plates as straight as possible. And you also want to make sure you push the bolt up from the underside. We're going to go through with a 7/16 inch socket and wrench and go through and start tightening all those nuts and bolts. Not all the way down, but almost all the way tight. We want to give it a little bit just for some fine tuning on positioning. We'll double check our positioning one last time, make sure the plate is aligned on the motor, and then we're going to snuggle those bolts down for the final time. We're not quite done with that silicone just yet. We're going to apply a heavy bead of silicone where the motor and that new cavitation plate come together, and also where the upper and lower plate come together. Now to smooth the silicone. This will work best if you have like a wet and a dry paper towel, because you want your finger to be wet when you're smoothing the silicone, but you need the dry one to get all the excess silicone off of your finger as well. You will also want to be careful that you're not applying too much pressure to where you squeeze out all of the silicone as you're smoothing it with your finger. So you want a gentle pressure, but firm enough to flatten out the silicone, but not so hard that you're removing all of your silicone. And now for one of the final bits of siliconing, we're going to apply a bead of silicone all around where those two fiberglass cavitation plates come together and sandwich the metal plate. We're going to apply a good bead of silicone all the way around that inside edge there. And then you come back through just like you did on the other side and you smooth it with your finger, gentle pressure, wet and dry paper towel, all that. Do the same thing again up top. Be sure to pay specific attention to where you have to fill and access your gear oil for your lower unit. Here's the finished product. The installed Cougar Marine USA cavitation plate installed on my Suzuki 140. Be sure to give that silicone 24 hours to dry before you take it out and test it. This cavitation plate was $309 shipped to my door, as opposed to the Fibertex Shaw Wing, which is going to be about $550. Looks to be a very good product, and I look forward to testing it and seeing how it turns out. As always, I'll throw a link down in the video description showing you where you can purchase this cavitation plate at. As always, guys, if this helped you out, you'd like to help me out, I sure would appreciate a like and subscribe. It does help the channel grow, and I look forward to posting more videos. We will see you next time on Bayboat Bassin'.